Today, we're standing at one of those moments in history where everything feels tightly wound, the kind of moment where a single meeting, a single sentence behind closed doors can quietly reshape the future of an entire region, and maybe much more than that. Because this is not just another diplomatic visit. This is not just another photo op in Washington. This is Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest serving prime minister, arriving in Washington for the sixth time since Donald Trump returned to the Oval Office. And this time, the stakes are different, sharper, more dangerous. At the center of it all, Iran, its nuclear program, and the question the world keeps circling but never fully answers: how far is too far? Before boarding his plane, Netanyahu stopped, looked into the cameras, and made something very clear. He said this visit is about policy principles. But what he really meant was pressure. Pressure on the United States, pressure on President Trump, pressure to draw a hard line, one that leaves Iran not just constrained, but completely disarmed, stripped of regional influence, and boxed into submission. Netanyahu framed it as a vision of peace, not just for Israel, he said, but for everyone. That phrase, peace for everyone, it sounds reassuring. But in the Middle East, those words often come just before storms, because almost simultaneously, from the other side of this geopolitical chessboard, Iran fired back, not with missiles, but with warnings. Ali Larijani, secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, issued a blunt message to Washington: don't bend, don't be pressured, and don't underestimate, in his words, the destructive role of Israel's leadership. And here's where the story deepens. While Netanyahu heads to Washington, Larijani heads to Muscat, Oman, the quiet backchannel capital of Middle East diplomacy, the same city where Iran and the United States have long held indirect, sensitive, and often secret nuclear discussions. Two men, two destinations, one conflict, and the clock is ticking. Let's slow this down and understand what's really happening here, because the headlines alone don't tell the full story. The US-Iran nuclear issue didn't begin yesterday, and it didn't begin with Trump or Netanyahu. For more than 2 decades, Iran's nuclear ambitions have haunted global diplomacy. Tehran insists its program is peaceful: energy, medicine, research. Washington and its allies have never fully believed that story. The 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, was meant to put that debate to rest. It froze Iran's program, opened inspection regimes, and lifted sanctions in exchange. But politics, especially in Washington, rarely moves in straight lines. The deal became controversial. Trump withdrew the US from it during his first presidency, calling it weak, flawed, and dangerous. Sanctions returned. Iran responded by gradually stepping away from its commitments. Fast forward to today, and we're back in a familiar but far more volatile place. Iran's nuclear capabilities are more advanced than before. Trust between Tehran and Washington is thinner than ever, and the region itself, from Gaza to Lebanon, from Syria to the Red Sea, is already on edge. This is the backdrop Netanyahu walks into. And make no mistake, Netanyahu is not coming to Washington as a passive observer. He is coming with an agenda, and history tells us he knows exactly how to play this game. Netanyahu has long positioned himself as Iran's most vocal adversary on the global stage. From dramatic speeches at the United Nations to intelligence briefings meant to shock allies, he has consistently argued one point: Iran must never be allowed to reach nuclear weapons capability, ever. Now, with Trump back in power, Netanyahu sees an opening, a president known for unilateral decisions, for distrusting multilateral deals, for responding strongly to pressure framed as national security. Netanyahu's message is simple but powerful. If the US compromises, the Middle East burns. If the US stays firm, peace is possible. But Iran tells a very different story. From Tehran's perspective, Israel is not a stabilizing force. It is a provocateur, a state that benefits from escalation, from fear, from permanent confrontation. That's why Larijani's words matter. When he warns Washington not to succumb to pressure, he's not just talking about Israel. He's talking about the entire architecture of US Middle East policy: lobbying, alliances, domestic politics, and strategic assumptions that have guided American decisions for decades. And here's the crucial detail many miss. Larijani didn't issue his warning from Tehran. He did it as he arrived in Oman. That's no coincidence. Oman has long served as the quiet bridge between enemies. It hosted the earliest secret US-Iran talks that eventually led to the 2015 deal. It remains one of the few places where both sides trust the room enough to sit, even indirectly. Larijani's meetings in Muscat with Oman's foreign minister Badr al-Busaidi and with Sultan Haitham bin Tariq signal something important. Despite the rhetoric, diplomacy is still alive, but it is fragile, and fragile diplomacy under pressure can snap. Now let's talk about timing, because timing is everything. Netanyahu arrives in Washington at a moment when the Biden-era balancing act is gone. Trump's approach is back, transactional, confrontational, and unpredictable. At the same time, the Middle East is already burning on multiple fronts. Gaza remains a wound that won't close. Hezbollah and Israel stare at each other across the northern border. U.S. forces in the region face constant pressure from Iran-aligned groups. Add a nuclear standoff to that mix, and the margin for error shrinks to almost nothing. That's why this visit matters. This is not just about negotiations. It's about leverage. Netanyahu wants to harden the American position before talks with Iran gain momentum. Iran wants to soften or at least stabilize the American position before Israel locks it in. Washington stands in the middle, publicly calm, privately conflicted. Because here's the uncomfortable truth for the U.S. There are no clean choices. Push Iran too hard and diplomacy collapses, leaving military options on the table. Ease pressure, and you risk alienating Israel and regional allies who see Iran as an existential threat. This is the tightrope Trump now walks again. And behind the scenes, advisors, generals, diplomats, and intelligence officials are all arguing different versions of the same question. Is containment enough? Or does this end only when one side blinks or breaks? What makes this moment even more dangerous is perception. Netanyahu believes pressure works. He believes Iran responds only to force or the credible threat of it. Iran believes resistance works, that time, patience, and regional influence will eventually outlast sanctions and pressure campaigns. Both sides believe history is on their side, and when everyone believes that, compromise becomes rare. This is why the language used right now matters so much. Netanyahu speaks of complete disarmament and forcing Iran to change its regional behavior. Those are maximalist demands, ones Iran is unlikely to accept under any circumstances. Iran, meanwhile, frames its position as defensive, sovereign, and non-negotiable. To them, giving up leverage means vulnerability, not peace. So where does that leave us? It leaves us at a crossroads where diplomacy and confrontation exist side by side, where one miscalculation, one leaked remark, one unexpected incident could tip the balance. And remember, none of this is happening in isolation. Russia is watching. China is watching. Regional powers are recalibrating quietly. Everyone understands that whatever happens between Washington, Tehran, and Jerusalem will ripple far beyond the Middle East. As Netanyahu steps into the White House and Larijani sits in quiet rooms in Muscat, the world waits, not for speeches, but for signals. Will Washington harden its stance? Will backchannel talks survive the pressure, or are we drifting toward another chapter of escalation that no one publicly wants, but many seem prepared for? This is the tension. This is the silence before decisions. So now the real question begins. Not what they're saying in public, but what they're doing quietly, behind closed doors. Because geopolitics is never about microphones. It's about rooms you don't see, notes you'll never read, and decisions that are denied for years, until history confirms them. Let's pull the curtain back. Behind Netanyahu's confident language about peace and security, there is a deep strategic fear, one that has shaped Israeli policy for decades. Israel does not measure threats the way large countries do. It has no strategic depth, no room for long-term uncertainty. For Israel, Iran with advanced nuclear capability, even without a bomb, is a psychological red line. Not because Iran is about to launch tomorrow, but because deterrence cuts both ways. If Iran reaches a point where it can credibly threaten nuclear escalation, Israel loses freedom of action. Airstrikes become riskier. Covert operations become more dangerous. Regional influence starts to balance out. That, for Netanyahu, is unacceptable. This is why his message to Washington is uncompromising. No halfway deals, no pauses, no reversible commitments. He wants an outcome where Iran is forced, politically, economically, strategically, to step back across the board. But here's what often gets lost in American discussions. That vision doesn't just pressure Iran, it pressures the United States itself. Because to enforce total Iranian rollback, Washington would have to commit to something far bigger than sanctions. It would require permanent confrontation, permanent military readiness, permanent regional tension, and that comes with a cost, one the American public is rarely asked if it's willing to pay. Now shift your focus to Tehran. Iran is not negotiating from weakness, but it's not negotiating from comfort either. Sanctions have hit hard. Oil revenues fluctuate. Domestic pressure simmers beneath the surface. But Iran has learned something critical over the past 2 decades. Survival comes from leverage. Nuclear capability, even short of weapons, is leverage. Regional alliances are leverage. The ability to disrupt shipping lanes, energy markets, and security calculations is leverage. That's why Larijani's presence in Oman matters so much. Oman is where Iran talks when it wants to keep doors open, but not appear desperate. The meetings with Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi and Sultan Haitham were not symbolic. They were strategic. Iran wants Oman to send a message to Washington. We are open to talks, but not to humiliation. And there's a deeper layer here. Iran knows that American administrations change, but Israeli pressure remains constant. So Tehran's long-term play is patience, outlast the pressure, wait for cracks, exploit divisions. And right now, those divisions are real. Inside Washington, there is no single unified approach to Iran. Some voices argue that renewed diplomacy, even limited, is better than unchecked escalation. Others believe Iran has crossed too many lines and must be confronted decisively. Trump himself sits somewhere in between. He distrusts Iran. He distrusts long wars. He believes in deals, but only deals that look like wins. That creates unpredictability, and unpredictability is dangerous when nuclear issues are involved. Now let's talk about the shadow players, because no major geopolitical standoff exists in a vacuum. Russia watches this closely. A distracted United States in the Middle East means less pressure elsewhere. An isolated Iran pushes closer to Moscow. Energy markets react. Strategic leverage shifts. China, too, has skin in the game. Beijing doesn't want war in the Gulf. It disrupts trade, energy flows, and global markets. But it also doesn't mind seeing U.S. dominance challenged diplomatically. Iran to China is both a partner and a pressure point. So when Washington calculates its next move, it's not just thinking about Tehran or Jerusalem. It's thinking about Moscow, Beijing, and the balance of global power. This is why decisions feel slower, heavier, more cautious than public rhetoric suggests, because every move echoes. But let's bring this back to the people, because geopolitics often forgets them. What happens if talks collapse? For ordinary Iranians, it means tighter sanctions, fewer jobs, higher prices, deeper frustration. For ordinary Israelis, it means living under constant threat, sirens, mobilizations, uncertainty. For Americans, it means higher oil prices, greater military commitments, and the risk of being pulled into yet another prolonged regional crisis. And for the Middle East as a whole, it means one thing above all else: instability becoming the norm, not the exception. This is why the choices being made now matter so deeply. They don't just affect leaders, they shape daily life. So where does this go? Let's walk through 3 realistic future scenarios, not predictions, but possibilities. Scenario 1, controlled diplomacy. In this path, Washington resists maximalist pressure. Backchannel talks in Oman continue. A limited framework emerges, not a grand deal, but an understanding. Iran caps certain activities. The U.S. eases specific pressures. Israel remains skeptical but restrained. Tensions stay high, but manageable. No one declares victory, but no one goes to war. This is the least dramatic outcome, and often the hardest to sustain. Scenario 2, strategic breakdown talks stall. Rhetoric hardens. Incidents multiply. Cyber attacks, proxy clashes, covert strikes. No official war is declared, but escalation becomes routine. Israel acts independently. Iran responds indirectly. The U.S. is drawn deeper, step by step. This is the slow burn crisis, the kind that doesn't shock the world all at once, but exhausts it over time. Scenario 3, open confrontation. This is the nightmare scenario. Diplomacy collapses. A major strike occurs, intentional or accidental. Retaliation follows. Energy markets spike. Regional allies are pulled in. Global powers rush to contain chaos they didn't prevent. No one truly wins, but everyone pays. And history tells us once this path begins, it's incredibly hard to reverse. So tonight, as Netanyahu speaks in Washington and Iranian officials sit quietly in Muscat, the world is not watching a single event. It's watching a test of judgment. Will pressure dominate strategy? Will fear override patience? Or will experience, hard-earned, costly experience, prevail? The biggest danger right now is not aggression. It's certainty. Certainty that force will solve what diplomacy cannot. Certainty that the other side will blink first. Certainty that history will forgive today's risks. History rarely does. And that leaves us with one final question, one that leaders may not ask out loud, but must answer all the same. In a region already shaped by wars that were supposed to be quick and decisive, are we about to repeat the same mistake, just on a far more dangerous scale?